Please welcome Kshama Sawant.
Sisters, brothers, and siblings, it's very important and inspiring that thousands of people have come to Chicago this week to protest the Democratic National Convention, despite all the obstacles in front of working people and the anti-war movement, that we are not silently standing by as the Democrats carry out this genocidal war and all their attacks on workers. The Democratic elites say that Harris is somehow not complicit in the war, that she was not responsible for the Biden-Harris administration's betrayals of working people, that Harris and Walz represent a progressive change of course. This is the great lie that they are selling. A few blocks from Chicago's Union Park, the Abandon Biden movement relaunched itself as Abandon Harris. Workers Strike Back and I were at the Abandon Harris press conference on Monday, yesterday, where we saw Arab and Muslim American leaders reject the great lie, reject the idea that their communities, or other working people can support this warmongering candidate, Kamala Harris. Unfortunately, leadership that is willing to stand up to the Democrats is in exceedingly short supply right now. We have had an onslaught of misleadership led by the Democratic Party, but assisted by so-called left media figures and by labor movement leaders. This misleadership is having a disorienting impact on our movement. That is why we saw 5,000 people on the streets of Chicago yesterday and not 50,000 or 100,000 as was projected before the coronation of Harris. I'm not here just to give a rah-rah speech. I'm here to speak the truth. It was only a couple of months ago that the media, including the New York Times, were making comparisons to the protests at the DNC in 1968, which helped define a generation, when the Vietnam anti-war protest movement put its stamp on history in Chicago. Now, instead of feeling the pressure from our movement, corporate media and the Democrats are celebrating. The Christian Science Monitor ran a headline yesterday: "Forget 1968, the DNC is underway in Chicago with minimal disruption." Is this because Harris has taken a position on the genocidal war that is different from Biden's or Trump's? Of course not. Harris has repeatedly reaffirmed that she will continue to back the Israeli war machine to the hilt. She met with Netanyahu the day after he received 58 separate standing ovations from the US Congress. Harris's campaign has directly confirmed that she does not support an arms embargo. Indeed, since Harris became the nominee, another $23 billion have been appropriated for the Israeli military. Entire bloodlines are being wiped out in Gaza. Countless people, including children and babies, are losing limbs. Disease is spreading. The United Nations said last month that Israel's intentional and targeted starvation campaign has led to the spread of famine throughout the Gaza Strip. Gaza has been reduced to rubble. None of this would have been possible without Biden and Harris, the two warmongers in chief of US capitalism and imperialism. We can have no illusion that Trump or RFK Jr. would do anything different. Trump is a warmongering anti-worker billionaire conman. But Trump left the White House as the most unpopular president in US history. And yet, now there is a possibility he could return to power. And the only reason for that is because the Biden-Harris administration sold out the working class in every sense of the term. When they ran for office in 2020, both Biden and Harris said they supported the $15 an hour minimum wage. Biden said he would be the most pro-union president in history, and he still makes those claims. Harris said she supported Medicare for all. She said she opposed fracking. These promises, like much of Gaza, lie in rubble. They sold out the railroad workers. They abandoned 15 and even the healthcare public option. Working people face a deep cost of living crisis. The price of bread has gone up by 147%. There is historic credit card, medical, and student debt. Working people are facing war and climate catastrophe. Working people faced with all this, they look back at the last 4 years, its massive levels of inflation, the skyrocketing cost of fuel, housing, all of this, and also a majority of American people are calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. And they look at all of this, and for all of these reasons, millions of working people want, correctly so, want to vote against the status quo in some shape or form. But many of the labor leaders and the liberal and self-described left media are strongly encouraging people to think Harris is that change. But the cold, hard reality is that for the people of Gaza and for working people in the United States and around the world, Harris and Walz are just a change of deck chairs on the Titanic. And many working people do recognize this. Make no mistake, the Democratic Party is the best builder of Trumpism. It was the betrayals of Clinton that led to Bush and the Iraq War. It was the betrayals by Obama in bailing out Wall Street banks instead of workers in escalating the war in Afghanistan and abandoning single-payer healthcare that led to the right-wing Tea Party and then eventually Donald Trump. Last night at the Democratic National Convention, AOC sold and celebrated the great lie. She claimed that Harris was working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and bring the hostages home. That's a quote. She called Trump a two-bit union buster and claimed that Harris, again, these are all quotes, Harris fights every single day to lift working people out from under the boots of greed, trampling on our way of life. Yes, Trump is a union buster and deeply hostile to workers and the union movement. But Harris was Biden's other half in blocking the railroad workers' strike, the most shameful act of union busting in decades. Yes, don't forget East Palestine, Ohio, absolutely. The CEOs of the big, Harris's campaign donors are a who's who of the billionaire class. The CEOs of the big corporations, every single one of them a ruthless union buster, are said to be euphoric. Again, another quote, euphoric that Harris is the Democratic nominee. No, they are not being delusional. Big business understand that Harris is on their side. That is why they're euphoric. By peddling her breathtaking lies last night, AOC, the former self-described socialist and working class representative, is cementing her position to rise to the top of the most powerful party of the capitalist class in the world. Last night's DNC extravaganza also saw the president of the UAW, the Auto Workers Union, Sean Fain, do his own share of spreading lies, calling Harris a fighter for working people. Fain is also one of the many labor leaders who have publicly called for a ceasefire and for an end to US military funding for the Israeli state, and then turned around and endorsed both Biden and Harris with no discussion or vote by the rank and file members of their unions. This type of sleight of hand is gravely damaging to working class organizing and the anti-war movement. And it is particularly devastating at this moment. Last year was the year of the largest number of American workers participating in major strike action. By refueling illusions in Harris and the Democrats, labor leaders like Fain are allowing the Democratic Party and the billionaire bosses they serve to co-opt the genuine desire of working and young people to fight back. What should Sean Fain and other labor leaders have done instead of cheerleading Harris at the DNC? They should have been mobilizing tens of thousands of rank and file union members to the protests outside the DNC. They should have called for a day of coordinated strike action across the nation to shut down the boss's profit machine. If this had been done, the streets of Chicago would have looked very different. Harris and the Democrats would have been very afraid. And the potential for a big vote for Jill Stein to help lay the ground for a new mass party of the working class would have been far greater as well. It is that kind of threat, the threat of labor strikes, social upheaval, and millions of votes for Jill Stein that is needed to end the war on Gaza and to win real victories for working people. We should learn the lessons from the history of class struggle and social movements. The Vietnam War was ended by mass movements of working and young people. For the first time in history, US imperialism was forced to abandon a war. The war was started and escalated under Democrats. It was ended under Republican President Nixon, not because of his support, but despite him, because there were millions of people on the streets, a mass anti-war movement. There were mass social movements, the Black Power movement, the women's movement, the Latino movement. The soldiers themselves were organizing and refusing to fight. The labor movement carried out mass strikes in the 1970s that changed US history as well. That is what is needed right now. But we cannot disentangle the question of how to end the war and US military funding to Israel and winning workers' rights from the question of how to vote in November or from the Democratic Party. The problem is that as long as labor and other leaders promote the Democratic Party, the warmongering party of the billionaire class, it will continue to stymie and paralyze any steps forward. The Democratic Party is the graveyard for movements. If we are going to rebuild a fighting labor movement in the United States and a powerful enough anti-war movement to end the genocide, we are not going to do that by putting our illusions in the Democrats or the leaders who tell us we should trust the Democrats. We need to rebuild the militancy of the rank and file. That is why we launched Worker Strike Back. That is why we are using Worker Strike Back to help build the anti-war movement and to fight for the biggest possible anti-war, pro-worker vote in this election for Jill Stein. And that is why you should join Worker Strike Back if you haven't already. But we also need to be sober about what this week means for our movement going forward. The low turnout this week represents a setback. Unless we build a much stronger movement, the Democrats are going to lead many working people down a blind alley once again. We can't let that happen without a fight. So whether we win hundreds of thousands of votes for Jill Stein as the strongest anti-war pro-worker candidate, or we win millions of votes, regardless, we have to fight for every possible vote. I'm not using these kinds of numbers to be discouraging, but for our movement to have a real and honest assessment of where things are is crucial. The great lie, if it is not effectively countered by our movements, and even if we do everything right, is going to mislead many people, and many others who rejected will vote for Trump or not vote at all. Every vote for Jill Stein is a clear vote against the genocidal war, against the billionaire agenda, and every single one of those votes means something. Every vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, conversely, is a vote for genocidal war and the further undermining of the working class and our movements. Being real about assessing our movement's strengths and weaknesses does not mean, in any sense, being pessimistic. In fact, it guards against the demoralization that would be inevitable unless we developed an honest, scientific assessment of reality. We need to draw accurate conclusions and plan our next steps accordingly. If we win 1 million votes for Jill Stein, that would be a victory in the context of the great lie. And rather than be discouraged, we should use that to take our movement forward. When we ran our first election in Seattle in 2012 for the Washington State House of Representatives, I received 9% of the vote on primary night. You're not mishearing me. It was 9% on primary night. We saw this as a real step forward, however, because we as socialists knew the obstacles of running a revolutionary socialist for elected office. We campaigned relentlessly, and that year, we won 29% of the vote in November. And we saw that election as a building block. The following year, in 2013, we became the first socialist elected to the Seattle City Council in over 100 years. We won because we fought against the Democratic Party in Seattle, and we organized working people, not by me kissing up to the Democratic politicians. This election year and the anger of millions against the war and the cost of living crisis has shown that there's a huge opening for a new party for working people, even if it is temporarily being set back by the great lie and the fear of Trump. There is still an important opening from now until November 5th to win hundreds of thousands of working class and young people to our movement and to the Jill Stein campaign. So let's campaign for that. For union members, if you're watching this either in person or on live stream, and you're a union member and you agree with our analysis, then please contact Worker Strike Back, because we need to put forward a number of rescind Harris endorsement resolutions in our union movement to start a real debate and challenge the labor leadership who are cheerleading Harris. We need to focus on all of these tasks related to the election now and use that to take our movement beyond this election. Workers' Strike Back is calling for a mass organizing conference in February of next year to do just that. And that's why, as I said, I hope you all join Workers' Strike Back if you haven't already. The Democrats and Republicans are rotten parties of the billionaires, and the system that they represent is rotten to the core as well. Under capitalism, the resources of society are owned and controlled by a sliver of billionaires and multimillionaires at the top. Capitalism is a system of crisis, a system of war, an engine for inequality and environmental destruction. The corporations act only in the interests of maximizing short-term profits at whatever cost in human lives and human suffering. We need to take the big corporations into democratic public ownership. Because we can't control what we don't own. US imperialism will continue to back the Israeli state because they see it as their key ally in the oil-rich Middle East and an essential ally in the US-China Cold War, the defining conflict of the present period. The brutal occupation of Gaza is at the root of this crisis, did not begin, and the occupation is at the root of this crisis. It did not begin on October 7th. The Palestinian people have a right to defend themselves, including with arms, and to the right of self-determination. But we should recognize there is no solution to the occupation by engaging in acts of terrorism, and fundamentally, there is no solution to the occupation on the basis of capitalism. We need a socialist Palestine, a socialist Israel, an end to the system of apartheid, and full rights for all Palestinians within Israel, which is only possible if we have a voluntary socialist federation in the Middle East. And we need to dismantle capitalism entirely to remove it root and branch. That is why I am a revolutionary socialist. If you think you're a socialist as well, then in addition to joining Workers' Strike Back, I hope you will also consider joining my organization, Revolutionary Workers Solidarity.